Sonic games have always been about going fast on ground. Trying to keep Sonic's speed and levels through memorization and practice, it's pretty much a telltale formula at this point, which makes you want to go fast in these games no matter what. As more Sonic games have come out though, racing games have as well, and Sega wanted in on that dough. Sonic isn't really the character that's known to willingly go in a car though, or is he? There have been quite a few Sonic racing games made over time featuring Sonic in and out of cars, really challenging Sonic's fittingness as to whether he should drive like the rest of his friends or run like usual. In this video, I'll be looking through the main Sonic racing games and judge which of the games' formulas work the best for racing. There's a lot to get through on the gameplay side, so without further ado, let's answer the question of, should Sonic drive a car? But wait, before I start to answer that question though, there's one thing we have to cover, the narrative. Why would Sonic even want to drive a car in the first place? Makes no sense in game design, right? Well, you have to approach it from the angle of the narrative. Sonic goes at the speed of sound and is likely the fastest thing alive according to lore. There aren't as many obstacles for him to conquer, and cars are like an equal to that for others. Racing isn't just about speed, but the mastery of technique. It's easy for Sonic to go fast, but not in the shell of a car. Plus, owning a special car is like an extension of yourself, so it reflects Sonic's nature and taste. He likes to be free and stylish, so the cars he's depicted in also reflect that. I'm not a knowledgeable car guy, so there are probably even more specific reasons as to why Sonic driving these particular race cars makes even more sense for him to do, but the reason Sonic drives in the car basically boils down to the fact that he's getting on everyone's level. He's the fastest thing alive, and he'll do it against anyone on your own rules. So, narrative can totally guide the games being made for a franchise, especially if they're designed well on top of that. However, the real question is whether Sonic racing games are best done in cars, because there's more than just cars for racing games in the Sonic franchise. So, let's get into the first series and see how Sonic does driving against his friends on the Game Gear. Our first series is Sonic Drift, which, as you can guess by the name, is all about drifting. Drifting lets you hit tight corners, which are necessary to win races, and all the different characters support different playstyles surrounding that. Some go faster with less handling and acceleration than others, and vice versa. You basically pick your own risk management and play through a pretty defined track, as even the pickups are the same every lap. It's a nice small game with a pretty basic skill curve designed for replayability and mastery top times, which makes sense for the Game Gear considering its limitations. However, one thing that I'm not fond of surrounding limitations is the way the game approaches its 3D effect. Now, by the time Sonic Drift came out, Doom and other 3D-like racing games had also come out, demonstrating how you could create a playable 3D world under the limitations of hardware at the time. Understandably, it made sense why Sonic Drift went through with its concept, but effectively it was horrible for gameplay. Essentially, it all boils down to perspective. See this turn? Okay, now tell me what direction I should start drifting in to make that turn. Pretty simple, I have to turn right, right? But now do that for this turn. See, now it's not as simple because I have to mind map my current POV to my player on the map and then decide where to turn. But okay, on a map with 90-degree turns, that isn't so bad because I just need to make some time to mind map and then make a turn. It just requires some more attention, which equals skill, right? But then you have these non-90-degree turns where you have to drift for a shorter amount of time, and then other CPUs can run you over, and it's literally impossible to understand how movement and a simplification of 3D space translates to your position and how much time a curve will be shown for, and slowly, you can understand that the Sonic Drift series is not intuitive at all. Game design wise, it fails because while a game like this can work, nothing is implemented to visualize the space in which these turns are happening at all. If I were to try and fix this, I would at least try these two things. One, add a transitional camera for turns, which puts you in a top-down view to see how to turn in space, or two, explicitly put road signs which tell you that a turn is coming up. Either of these could partially solve the turning issue without changing game mechanics. Interestingly, Sega went with the latter solution, which helps, but they didn't implement it on all turns, which still leaves the guesswork issue up in the air for some especially important turns on tracks. It's an annoying issue that really stumps the enjoyment of these games before you compete on memorization, because it's all about the feel and memorization of this badly designed 3D space instead of your grip on the controls. Now, I haven't talked about Sonic Drift 2 yet, which is the sequel to Sonic Drift released about a year after the first. It adds more tracks, characters, and generally cleans up the terrain while adding some new obstacles and gimmicks. For the most part, the tracks in the beginning felt quite nicer to play, whether that was the character I was using or maybe the difficulty of the track itself, but the same guess the turn issue kept happening over and over again, which really brick-walled me from wanting to play the game again. It's such a notorious issue for these games because even with the part of Sonic Drift 2 moving towards being a party game with more items and whatnot, I barely noticed it because the turns just felt so unenjoyable that I eventually quit the game and just moved on. Again, I understand that these games were made on the Game Gear, and that there are limitations even while great things could be done on the platform, but it really begs the question of whether Sega should have made these games actually 3D, or gone for something safer in the end, like a Sonic Labyrinth-esque perspective, which would have at least made the game visually decipherable at the cost of visual style. Maybe Sonic Drift just wasn't technologically ready for the Game Gear platform. But Sonic R was on the Sega Saturn. Made by Traveler's Tales, the same developers behind Sonic 3D Blast and other technologically impressive games, Sonic R was Sonic's debut racing title for Sega Saturn in a completely different direction. This time, instead of being in a car, Sonic races against all his friends and enemies on foot, while Amy and Eggman race in vehicles, probably because they're too lazy. Sonic R basically controls like a 3D Sonic platformer. You run, jump, and do sharp turns at any point to keep speed going. The controls seem pretty simple, but their mastery comes down to usage. Some people complain about Sonic R for its slippery controls, but it actually makes some sense when you consider it in gameplay. You have options to be more specific with your controls, but you have to understand how to use them to minimize as much slowdown as possible. It makes better sense when you take into account the collectibles along each track. For specific stuff like the coins, a struggling player may stop to swivel around slowly to get the coin, wasting precious time, but an experienced player will line up, slam into the coin, and pivot around to continue the race like nothing happened. This acceptance of looser controls even comes down to the game design of other stuff like rolling, in which characters like Sonic will curl up into a ball and change in movement. I heard from somewhere this is a kind of drift or a situational move to go faster. In my experience, it seemed to change how acceleration worked while limiting how much you can turn, and I didn't explore the mechanic beyond that. Considering this game came out around the time of manuals, I assumed this is something that would be more explained there, but I did see some cases where I went a little faster even if I wasn't using the roll as intended, so there's that. I would just have to practice more to get it. On the topic of practice, the most enjoyment for Sonic R came down to 100%ing it. That means doing the Chaos Emeralds and challenge characters, each of which varied in difficulty. In terms of difficulty, the Chaos Emeralds are the easier part of that, as they require collecting about 50 rings for each one across levels to earn them by reaching first place, which isn't hard at all to do if that's your only goal. This is especially true if you're replaying the levels over and over again to do the challenge characters through the 5 coin collectibles in each track, which is where the real difficulty of the game comes in. To even attempt racing the challenge characters, you have to finish in at least 3rd place while collecting the coins, which is definitely not something that happens on your first go around. Often, I would actually explore each track and find where the coins are before trying to get them to attempt racing the challenge characters, and that worked well once I devised my route for each track. Sometimes, it would require subverting the natural flow of the track, like collecting coins out of order, but the openness of the tracks allowed for it, which was good. In fact, the openness of the tracks naturally asked for the player to do this kind of stuff because the challenge characters get really fast. For example, in the first track, you race against Metal Sonic, who just completely wipes the floor with you out from the start. To win, you might think that you have to follow Metal Sonic and just hit the turns like crazy, but what actually worked for me is cutting around the level by double jumping in huge wide arcs. You just go so far so fast that even if Metal Sonic rubber bands, you've already gone far enough to the point that Metal Sonic decides to take the loop and you don't to win first place. This is great game design to the point where even if Metal Sonic is the hardest challenge character to beat and unlock, this strategy can be reused and naturally adapted around each track in a way that feels like Sonic cheated the level. We saw him hopping on rocks in Sonic CD, and now he's doing that here in Sonic R. Honestly, for how much this game gets dogged, there's very little to complain about besides the fact that you can't go back after unlocking Super Sonic. I'm yet to play the hard difficulty, but everything was reasonably fair for me in about 3 hours, and the game felt very stylistically Sonic to me with the graphics and music. I enjoyed it a lot, but you want to know what I enjoyed even more? Something that completely flips the script off of Sega's own consoles. Sonic Riders is a completely different racing game from the next generation of Sonic, sporting a new style on unfamiliar new vehicles. Sonic isn't as much on foot, but he's also not in a car. It's a completely new avenue that connects directly to the sort of competition and agency that makes Sonic Sonic. In Sonic Riders, you ride on extreme gear, which which are basically these hoverboards powered on air. They move pretty fast, and when combined with the drifting and boosting, they allow you to hit even higher speeds. But be careful, because if you spend too much air by drifting and boosting, you'll be forced to walk, which caps your max speed out noticeably. So to keep up, you'll need to perform tricks and take shortcuts for different character types, all of which replenish air significantly. On top of that, there's mechanics with air directly, such as turbulence. Turbulence takes the form of these wind trail half pipes, either produced by racers boosting or sections directly on the level, and it allows you to move faster with no cost to air. It even allows you to trick off of it sometimes for normal trick stunts or entire shortcuts as well. This is a really unique mechanic because it somehow balances recovery without being overpowered. Sometimes it can even be a disadvantage to take turbulence because it could send you off into the wall or void in tracks to slow you down, and so sometimes you want to hop off the turbulence by hitting both triggers. Another thing you can do with both triggers is attack players behind you to slow them down. You can also attack players to the side or from behind, which sometimes changes trajectory and play some funny animations, but it's usually a lesser part of gameplay as it only affects their ring count. Speaking of the ring count, it can actually play an important part in races, as it not only raises your max stats, but also replenishes your air gauge while raising its limit. Along with holding jump to change the length of your air time to access certain shortcuts, there's a lot of depth to these controls that makes them great to use when learned. However, learning the controls of Sonic Riders is not so cut and dry. Admittedly, there is a video in the settings of the game showing you the controls, but some things are just a little confusing to get, like flying in the air. You actually have to hold the jump button and use the left stick to angle your flight, which is not necessarily what the on-screen controls suggest. But once you pick up everything, Sonic Riders is a very characteristic game that just really locks you in.
I got to check this game out with AVM a few weeks ago at the time of writing the script. We both went through the game's campaign, which features 13 stages total, split between its two parts. It does a similar thing to Sonic Adventure 2, where there's a split story. You have your hero stages, which follows a perspective of Sonic and crew, and the Babylon stages, which follow a new set of characters introduced in Riders, Jet, Wave, and Storm. These three form the Babylon Rogues, which are a sort of rival faction. I really enjoy their designs, and their interactions with the heroes and with each other are pretty fucking funny to me. The tracks were all pretty fun to play through. I found that the hero tracks were much easier to navigate compared to the Babylon tracks, which is a given, as the hero campaign is the first one that you play through. The Babylon tracks are kind of like alternative takes on the hero tracks. For example, the first track in the hero campaign is Metal City, whereas its equivalent in the Babylon campaign is Night Chase, which takes place in the exact same location, but it has a pretty different layout. Now, throughout the game, the particular track highlights for me were Egg Factory and Digital Dimension. Egg Factory has a lot of these really sharp turns and also these massive shortcuts you can take, and I generally just really like industrial settings in games. Digital Dimension, while technically not part of the main campaign, was also a big highlight for me when I was playing through the mission mode. It's essentially two stages in one, where one part is this really freaky, hellish landscape, and the other half is essentially like a heavenly kind of like cathedral landscape. Not sure how to put it. In every stage, there's a lot of routes the player can take based on their character type and how you interact with ramps. I was actually about halfway into the Babylon campaign when I first realized you can control how you jump off of ramps, and that revelation was insane, because after that point I started discovering so many new shortcuts in the tracks I had already beat, and that sense of discovery and mastering the layouts of every track really amped up my enjoyment of this title. Now, Sonic Riders, it had a very mixed reception on launch, and even today you'll find that some people have a very big distaste for this game. A lot of critique levied was regarding the controls and mechanics, which I can partly understand, as the game doesn't really make an effort to show the player what control options they have. As AVM said, there is a tutorial like AMV, but it's really out of the way. Sonic Riders is not a game that you can just pick up with no experience and play. Like, you can't view it like another Mario Kart type game, right? It's something you have to sit with and really figure out the controls for. Now, Sega had taken note of the polarizing reviews on Riders, and for their next game in the trilogy of spin-offs, they would take the mechanics of Riders in a new direction.
Sonic Riders Zero Gravity is the next game in the Sonic Riders series, and it's not exactly how I thought it was. On the surface, it features some new gravity mechanics, like taking shortcuts by launching yourself with zero gravity, but it is much more of a simplification for better and worse. On merit, I will appreciate how in-depth the tutorial is. You definitely get to learn about the game's mechanics and not be left in the dust, but I will stress that this game is really just a Sonic Riders simplification. For example, tricking used to be based on swinging the left stick around on timing to get the maximum possible rank when landing, which wasn't too hard and fairly balanced. But now it's trivialized, as all you need to do is press the jump button at the right time. That's it. Similarly, drifting is much easier, as you just hold a button to screech to a grinding halt and boost in the direction you want afterwards. At first, I thought maybe this was a skill-based mechanic because you would stop and lose time on readjustment, but it doesn't really work that way in effect, because it's literally just a simplification of drifting that launches you in one way, lowering the skill curve. On top of that, there's literally just a go fast button, where even though it limits your turning, effectively just makes you go fast, and all you need to do to keep your speed is just hit random flying objects. It's such a departure from the agency of Sonic Riders. In that game, you had to be active, keep attention to everything happening around you, and the difficulty was by skill. In Zero Gravity, it's mostly about your knowledge of game mechanics, to where the reworking of the level up mechanics are basically just a bar for stats and shortcuts. Like, that's really it, and it disappoints me. And really, I don't want to leave it off at this, because this game has great graphics, music, and welcome additions like the chain groove when entering shortcuts. But it's really that simple at the end of the day, and I managed to beat Zero Gravity in half the time that it took for Sonic Riders in one sitting. I feel like this is the result of some mistaken playtesting or a study that truncates the active parts of Sonic Riders to be more beginner friendly, but I can't say for sure. What I might be able to say for sure is that Sonic Free Riders did the series in. It's basically Sonic Riders for the Xbox 360's Kinect, and it just looks painful. Even though there's an unconnected version now, I even had a friend tell me that this one isn't worth playing at all, and I can see why. Not only does it seem painful, but the whole formula just looks messed up by itself. It's not worth covering in depth, but I just wanted to mention it before getting back into the rest of the Sonic car racing games, which is a whole can of worms on its own. The first returning Sonic in a car racing game that I'll be looking at is Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. Nothing much to say besides that it's your box standard party racing game. It controls fine and the difficulty is fair on its own, but its main issue is RNG. Essentially, there's no way to predict if you'll win a race unless you're fully looking behind yourself, because at any second, someone could get an item, and items in this game are really devastating. I think this is poor game design because while items are good and can be used to leverage an advantage, there's never a way to predict them in this game. It really just makes things annoying. Besides that, things like the way you charge up for a race are cool, and well, this game just really comes across to me as a Sega racing game more than anything. I mean, I know that's the point, but something about this game just feels so marketable. Even games like Super Smash Bros. Never felt that way, and it kind of changes the way I think about the game. In total, I'm just glad this was a small racing game I picked up from the Sonic Humble Bundle, and not a full-on $40 or $60 title like it was back then.
All-Stars Racing Transformed is a game that I played while growing up. It expands on the party kart racer schema with a pretty fun gimmick, being the kart transformations. Your kart can transform into a water or air vehicle, and this leads to a lot of really cool stage designs. Now, most stages have a mix of ground and air or ground and water, and some of them have a mix of all three. And this mix-up of gameplay styles was really unique for the time. Its closest approximation would be Mario Kart 7, which came out a few years before. And while it shares the same kind of transformations, All-Stars Racing Transform uses this gimmick a lot better, in my opinion, and it's genuinely crazy how well they managed to pull it off. Another praise I'll sing for this title is its campaign. Now, instead of a linear progression or cup system like you'd expect in Mario Kart, or even in the previous title, which had a cup-based campaign, you are given different routes and optional missions and unlocks, so it is not a linear affair. Your ability to go into different routes and progress in the campaign is dictated by the amount of stars that you currently have, and you get these stars by completing tracks, and each track offers 3 different difficulties. So the higher the difficulty that you play on, the more stars you'll get for completing the track. It's a pretty fun system, and the variety of game modes present in the campaign is great as well, because it keeps things feeling fresh and engaging. Now, some other small things, I like the way the characters are handled. It's not often you will see, progression in a kart racer in this kind of way, and I've heard that some people don't like the way that player leveling in the mod system is handled, but I actually quite like it, and it kind of served as encouragement to check out the other racers and try to level them up too. Speaking of racers, the roster itself is pretty fucking stupid in a good way. I never thought that Ralph from Wreck-It Ralph would be racing alongside the fucking Pyro from Team Fortress 2 and Football Manager guy. This is the first time I've ever seen this guy, and apparently, it's from a very long lineage of Sega football management games, so that is very interesting. Drifting feels great in this game, as well as the trick system. Now, instead of using tricks just for boost, which you can still do that, there actually is a bit of utility in being able to reposition where you land if you decide to trick to the sides. And this is particularly useful in those water sections where it can be a little bit more challenging to steer your vehicle. And I usually use that to reposition myself to hit more ramps as I'm going through those sections. So very handy. Another thing to note with the tricking is that in the air you can kind of do barrel rolls and stuff to also reposition yourself, and that can be really useful in avoiding oncoming power-ups, you know, like people trying to fire stuff at you. Very, very useful. If I had to say something bad about this game, I would like to say that the power-up stuff, the issues that were present in the previous title, are still kind of present here. You know, I've had many instances where I've had the first place pulled out from under me by someone throwing a snowball at me, and then I'll be sent back to fucking 5th, 6th place. It's horrible. And I will give the game credit, you know, it doesn't have any blue shell type power-ups where it will just fuck you up for playing the game well. You know, that's always annoyed me with Mario Kart. If you are skilled enough to have a big gap between you and the rest of the racers, like if you're very far ahead in first place, there's a very good chance you're not going to get hit by anything. So it kind of becomes a non-issue if you are good enough. You know, more just a personal gripe that I've had with the game, but very small one at that. Out of all of Sumo Digital's kart racers with Sega, this one, in my opinion, is bar none the best. And growing up as a Sega kid, I really appreciate all the little references to their classic titles and their arcade titles. All of it was great. Give this one a shot if you want a really solid kart racer. It is especially fun with friends. AVM and I have played this one together many times already.
Team Sonic Racing is the next game in line, following the same formula from All Stars Racing, but without as much of the transform stuff. In this game, instead of racing by yourself, you race in a team of 3, where the goal isn't just to get first place, but also to get your whole team up into the highest ranks possible, so you have to change your playstyle up. Coming back to this game, I thought that this mechanic would basically be like just some stuff that you have to do on top of placing well and getting as many team boosts as possible, but actually, the case might be that there's no correlation with how well you interact with the mechanics of the game. This includes things like sharing items and catching your team's trail to speed you up, because even if you do really well and make educated decisions, there's a non-zero chance that your team will just place below the top because of RNG. And RNG was a noticeable problem in Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing as well. To see it show up like this again just makes the game feel more tedious, especially when interacting with the meaningless team mechanic. On top of that, this was probably the most buggy racing game I played by far, and you can see what happened to me right now on screen. Even though these were rare bugs, it's still important to show since none of the other games I've played have shown bugs like this. So it could be noticeable in your gameplay, which is not good. I think what hurts most is that I bought this game full price at launch expecting a meaningful experience, but just got this, and it's a disappointing departure considering the quality of the last game made by the same developer, Sumo Digital. But can the latest Sonic Racing title claim the glory back? Sonic Racing CrossWorlds is the latest Sonic title released in late 2025. Unlike its predecessor games, it's developed in Unreal Engine 5 to bring a whole load of new content like characters, transitioning stages, and much more. So, sounds like it should be a bountiful experience, right? Well, at a first glance, the demo of CrossWorlds seemed alright. The drift was definitely different and more lenient, and the items were much the same as before. But as I played more and more, I began to realize how much this game babies you, as it's almost insulting. When doing tricks and transformed, it felt perfectly fine, because if you trick too much, you'd get punished for doing so. But in CrossWorlds, you can almost always just spam a bunch of nonsensical tricks which mean nothing. Like, here's the win on that. And in fact, you might as well just give the whole win to the player because the difficulty is just so low even on the maximum setting offered by the demo. My first time playing, I got first place in almost every race inside of the Grand Prix, and it was just too easy. The game was so lame and predictable, especially with the very upfront and static camera, and it lost that dynamic and style from the other games that just put the pressure right up in your face. There's almost no risk in CrossWorlds, as all you need to do is just race. Like, it's even less engaging than Team Sonic Racing. And on top of that, I think the real kicker is the fact that the game is developed in Unreal Engine 5, as I mentioned earlier. On my mid-range machine, I was easily able to hit 1440p 60 in previous titles, and these games look great, but going into CrossWorlds, the frame rate has gone way down. There's ugly anti-aliasing, and the game looks like I'm playing a half-baked mobile game. Understandably, I could tweak the settings, but these were the default, and I don't think it's an excuse under the guise of generational game development. Nothing that this game does is new, and the CrossWorlds stage transitions that the game relies on as its gimmick lags really noticeably, which just sucks. It's an especially disappointing precedent when all of the previous Sonic titles were developed in-house to great technical standards, and well, here I am now just playing this Unreal Engine slop. It just sucks. Ironically, there's probably some in-house reason they're using Unreal Engine over other stuff, considering the horrible public documentation it has on Epic's official website, but it's just bad. It's just a downgrade in almost every way, and I'm surprised that this is the standard. I wish I could say better about the Sonic kart racers from this period, but they're just kind of watered down on the whole formula. I guess that's that. So that's pretty much the main Sonic racing games. Some good, some bad, but let's answer the question, should Sonic drive a car? No. In general, the games in which Sonic isn't in a car tend to be a lot more stylistic and creative. Games like Sonic R and Riders really immersed me in what Sonic is supposed to be, while the other games made me think about Sonic and Sega characters driving in cars. That's not to say that games like Transformed were bad, it was actually really good. I even played it after writing this video, but you can tell what direction they went for, obviously. Money, I got. You just can't beat money when the generalizations succeed. Just look at Mario. You think the biggest selling games are platformers? Wrong. It's kart racers. I mean, even I was a little surprised to learn that, seeing as it's the face of the franchise, but it makes sense. Though, that sense is only working for Mario, not so much Sonic. It's safe to say that once all the juice has been worked out from collabs, character appearances, and general player base engagement, we're going to see the same stagnation as Team Sonic Racing, probably not as bad though, but who knows, I guess they'll eat up that loss. From games like Mania and Frontiers, I think there's genuinely a chance to make some money on stuff like Riders, or even a direct Sonic Racing game like Sonic R, but tradition wins and that's that. I'm happy mods fill in the gaps though. Big shout out to Sonic Riders Tournament Edition, Sonic Riders DX, SRB2K, and Ring Racers. These mods are absolutely addictive and keep me connected to Sonic stuff in general. Honestly, I'd probably be down to cover stuff like SRB2K or some of the other odd time attack style games like Rivals in the future, but we'll have to see. For now, I want to give a big thanks to my supporters, and well, I'll see you all in the next video.